and I'm going to be presenting the Hiwa K exhibition. So I'm hoping if you haven't had an opportunity to see the exhibition, you do, as it ends on the 13th of February. So we've got a few weeks left. I'm just going to give you an introduction to the artist, Hiwa K. This is a collaboration actually with Jameel Art Centre Dubai and the Power Plant Art Gallery in Toronto. So it started in Dubai and it travelled over to us, and then will open in Toronto in June this year, and that will be the end of the tour. But each show has had a different display of works kind of selected for each of the gallery spaces. So this is Hiwa K's first solo exhibition in Ireland, and it brings together works he's created in the past 10 years. And in these works, he kind of draws from personal memory, and he tells stories of the ongoing global crisis of war and migration and his own personal experiences. So if we give a bit of background on Hiwa, in 96, at the age of 21, he fled Kurdistan. So his hometown is Sulaymaniyah in Kurdistan, and he fled on foot. And it actually took him quite a number of times to do this, because it was an incredibly dangerous journey. So his destination was Europe, and it took him 5 months and 20 days to get to Europe. And he lived in Germany for almost 2 decades. And then actually in 2020, he's now actually moved back to Sulaymaniyah in Kurdistan, and he's got a home there and a small farm, and he's actually hoping to establish an art centre there as well and promote the creative talents that are coming from Kurdistan. So I'm going to start with Hiwa when he was in college. So when he got to Germany, he also needed to get citizenship. So while he was waiting for this, he applied for the Mainz Academy of Arts. And in order to get in, he had no kind of previous experience. He had no portfolio. So he called on friends, and collectively they made a portfolio that he submitted to get into the academy, and he was selected. So this was kind of acting as a waiting to get his citizenship, but also he had learnt the Western style of art, but didn't really understand it. He just learnt the kind of strict way of painting and the way of drawing, but had no other kind of background knowledge of art history. And then he also, growing up in Kurdistan, there was no kind of contribution from his own culture. There was never a promotion of it. So he's really going in as like a blank canvas. And he was given this studio space in the academy to work with other students, and he kept this space blank. So he had it for a year, and this was his space and his space to learn and come to terms with actually just this whole journey he's made to Germany. And he just wanted to keep it as a clear blank space to kind of adjust himself. But obviously his professors didn't quite understand this, and were kind of constantly at him to, you have to produce something. And he's like, no, this is my blank space. This is the kind of wall that I'm working with. And people would kind of, whenever he went away, they would come and take over his space and hang their own work in it, and then he'd have to come back and repaint it and create his blank space. And that was his work, but it wasn't following kind of like what the academy wanted, so they evicted him a number of times, to the point that he no longer had the studio space and ended up kind of learning within the corridors. So he got to know kind of the security guards, and he was kind of learning from the outside in. So that was his kind of how he started kind of in the arts, and he doesn't call himself an artist. You know, he all of his works are based on memory, and he doesn't feel kind of tied to any particular place. He just says that he's just based on his feet, and wherever he ends up, he kind of adapts. So and as well, just to keep in mind for in his works, he does draw a lot from his growing up with his mother and father, and they're two kind of very kind of polar opposites, where his mother was very kind of pragmatic and straight and direct, and then his father was kind of quite the romantic, you know. So for example, in order to get to places, he'd usually take like the scenic route rather than just a direct way of getting there. So that's the way he kind of approaches his work, where there's a lot of kind of very heavy political undertones, and personal experience is quite hard to get your head around. But the way that he translates this into his work is a very kind of accessible way of understanding. So, but we'll see this as we come across his pieces. So I'm going to start with this work, and it's My Father's Colour Period from 2013. And as you can see here, it's a display of old TV sets. So these range from the 60s to the 90s. And on each of the videos is a Iraqi TV program, and then on top of the screens has been a coloured filter has been added, and they'll mimic the type of display that is coming onto each TV. And this references his childhood and growing up in Kurdistan. And when he was growing up in the 70s, they didn't have access to color TV. Whereas in Iraq they did, but the Kurds didn't have access to it. So his father would add these kind of filters. He'd find out what was on TV and add filters to kind of mimic maybe whatever film. So if the film maybe had a lot of water on it, he'd add like a blue element, and he'd change these every week to kind of mimic the TV shows that would be on. And it wasn't until later that, from the artist talking to other people that grew up from his area, that a lot of other people were also doing this at the time. So it was kind of like this kind of silent process that was happening against the kind of restrictions that were put against Iraqi Kurds and their access to certain things. It even went so far as to even when color TV did come in, that the color element was taken out of the TV to any that went to Iraqi Kurds. So it was just kind of another way that they were a minority and didn't have access to a number of things. So it's kind of this kind of a gorgeous piece to kind of witness. Is, you know, you get this kind of ambient sound from all of the TVs, but it has this very kind of political undertone then of just what it was like to grow up in Kurdistan at the time. And obviously then when the color television came in the 80s, you had all these kind of flashy pop images that were about at the time, but you also got the real gruesome realities of the Iran-Iraq war of the 1980s as well. So before I go into if we were walking into the next room, I'm just going to give a bit of background on Amna Saraka in Kurdistan, and because this place comes up a lot in Hiwa's works, or he references it in different pieces. So it was in 1986 and 1989, the Iraqi state conducted the Al-Anfal campaign, and it was considered to be of genocidal in intent and against the Iraqi Kurds. And thousands of Kurds were in fact tortured in these sites. So in 1991, a popular revolt occurred in Sulaymaniyah, and it was against Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party. So it was the Kurdish guerrilla army called the Peshmerga stood up against there was an uprising against northern Iraq and against the Hussein's control. Now, it ultimately failed, but what they did gain is this gained access to this building and control of it. And at the time, there was only kind of rumors about what was happening inside this building, but once they had gained access to it, it was far worse than anyone could actually imagine. The sort of things that actually happened in this, there was women, children, men, everyone was kind of kept here and tortured in multiple different ways, and absolutely horrific site, but it has since become the Iraqi National Museum of War Crimes since 2003, and so it's kind of kept as a site of memory to kind of consider all of the things that happened here under Saddam Hussein. So the next work is actually, this would be a video piece in the gallery, and this references that building, and was a kind of a rehearsal for a performance that never happened. And what you see in it is Hiwa is here, and he is doing flamenco dancing. So when he arrived in Germany in 2001, he took the opportunity to study music, and he became a pupil of the flamenco master Paco Pena. And his relation to music has since been used as a tool for leveling a different dimension of critique within today's society. And it brings a kind of bridge between the collective and participatory dimension within his work. So here he goes to the site, his plan is to go to the site of Amna Saraka, and within the walls, within the building, he flamenco dances while having a stethoscope on to monitor his heart rate, and his taps mimic his heart rate. But of course, the more he taps, the faster his heart rate goes, and the impossibility of being able to actually keep up with his heart rate. So it's just, he's kind of doing this with Amna Saraka. He is reflecting on his own connection to this building, it being around during his childhood, having gone there as himself as a child to visit family members. You know, he would have known a lot of people that were kept within this building, but he's also echoing the kind of noises and the horrific things that happened within this building. And also throughout this video, we can hear kind of hammering and construction in the background. So this kind of just references then how this site is kind of adapting and changing with the times, and kind of transforming from what it was originally. So you can see in the background there, that's the video. And then this piece, very prominent piece in the middle of the floor. And it's an installation work with these drawings. And there's a number of kind of videos that are lowered to the ground as well. And this piece is called Katis from 2009. And this is a work where Hiwa collaborates with two other people that he knows from Kurdistan, one of them being Abbas, who's directly involved with this work, and another being Nazad, who we come across in the work later. And Abbas is an electrician and an antennae maker, but he's also a deserter of the Iran-Iraq war. And on the floor, you see all these kind of pieces made of wood and wire, and there's kind of like a newspaper kite. All these kind of different elements make up a handmade antennae. And what Abbas did, as he was a deserter, he could not trust even his neighbors. So he was essentially in hiding. But in order to find out information, he made a homemade antennae so he could find out information from both sides of the war to know what was going on. Because if anyone found out where he was, he would be imprisoned. and most likely taken to Amna Saraka. So he, this is an element that he made in all these several parts, and then in the videos is Hiwa talking to Abbas and his different experiences. And actually the translation for this video is available on our website, and you can read through the script for each of the different videos, and Hiwa talking to Abbas, and also Nazad, who has an archive of all of the metals and weapons of war and shrapnel that has been found over the years, or over the 40 years. And he kind of has this amazing knowledge of where each piece of weaponry comes from, where the metals come from, what to do with the metals, each of the components and what they're made up of. So with Nazad and Abbas, he gets this whole kind of, there's amazing knowledge between the two of them, from engineering to the kind of scientific, and they're working with next to nothing and able to create, you know, antennae and stuff just to survive and find out information. And then at the end of the wall, there is the work diagonal, and this is a photograph. Again, a return to the beneath this fragment of the building. And in this body, in this photograph, Hiwa almost looks like a kind of a Roman, Greek and Roman kind of figure, kind of classical representation of the masculine body, but he's referencing just the kind of this fragmented part of the building, again his connection to it, and how this kind of site is changing and adapting around him. But it will always be this very harsh memory that we will have with this site in Kurdistan. And then in the next room, we have a video work, and this is a projection view from above from 2017. And this work was made for Documenta in Kassel in Germany. And it was a collaboration actually with Lawrence Abu Hamdan, which you'll remember from Worlds Without End, where we showed his work with the glass projection in the other room. And this work is a really interesting piece. So you have a dialogue, which is an interview with a character that he calls M, and we have a view of a model of Kassel after it was destroyed. And just a bit of background on the background of this video. So in 1991, a division was created between northern Iraq, Kurdistan, and the rest of Iraq. And the UN considered Kurdistan a safe zone. So as a refugee, you have to come from the unsafe zone, or at least prove that you do, in order to qualify as a refugee. So during this, we hear M, who is trying to apply for refugee status, and it takes him 5 years to even get the interview, and then finds out that the place that he's from apparently is considered by the UN as a safe zone. But he didn't find this out until he actually gets the interview. So he applies, so during it is a kind of interrogation of the area, and he ends up not getting refugee status and being sent back to where he was from and deported. So he was from a very dangerous area, and he was also a deserter, so it was extremely dangerous for this character M to be situated in this place. So he ends up crossing the border and going to an area that is considered the unsafe zone. And he's not from this area, but he learns from the locals the area. He looks at maps and kind of learns all the streets, and then reapplies for refugee status and gets it immediately. And even though he's not from this area, and anyone else that has been applying who has lived in this place all their lives doesn't get refugee status. And it shows how this interview does its very best to not approve refugee status for people, because a lot of the time the questions are coming from above, so the people will know the streets in and out, and they from their daily routes, and they know all the buildings. But when they're shown a map from above, they don't understand the area, and therefore they can go, well, you obviously are not from here, so therefore you don't get refugee status. So it's quite a corrupt system. So this work is highlighting it, and kind of absurdities then that come with war, and this kind of ruined model that was after World War II, when Kassel was completely demolished. So it's just highlighting kind of ruined empires as well. So it's a really, really strong piece. So if you have a chance to come in to kind of hear this dialogue, it's really, really interesting. And then going into the next room, there's a projection and a video work shown together, and this is This Lemon Tastes of Apple. And in 2011, there was a revolt in Sulaymaniyah, and it saw thousands of people take to the street to protest against corruption associated with the ruling Kurdish Democratic Party. And these protests took place in an area called the Freedom Square. So this is a live footage that Hiwa actually, this wasn't planned. He showed up to the protest, and this footage was taken by someone who was recording at the time. And he decided to join it, and he brought along his harmonica and his friend who had a guitar and a megaphone. And it was kind of just to kind of drum up the protest, and they're actually walking towards tear gas and live bullets. So what you see in this video is that they actually start to be attacked, and there's kind of chaos ensues afterwards. But he's playing Ennio Morricone's Man with a Harmonica from Once Upon a Time in the West from 1968 as they walk towards the militia. And this title references a previous attack in 1988, where there was a chemical gas was used in the town of Halabajar, and also in other Kurdish areas as well. And they referenced that there was a distinct smell of apple when this gas went off. And then in this video, when the tear gas was used against the protesters, lemon apparently helps the stinging effects of the gas. So these kind of two smells, the apple and the lemon, kind of blockends this 23-year-long history of protesting and attacks on the people of Kurdistan. And this work is Do You Remember What You Were Burning? So this is obviously where the title of the show comes from. And this also takes place in Freedom Square. And this is after that protest takes place. It's now banned that more than 2 people can meet up in the square. So Hiwa invites a number of students to bring a book of their choice and to come to the square with a magnifying glass and quietly read from the book. And as they read each line, they burn that sentence with the magnifying glass. So it's kind of this coming together, not essentially a protest, but more again like a silent protest, and reading the documents, and then that kind of material is then kind of disintegrates away as they read it. And pre-image, this is another video work, and it's actually situated up quite high, because for this whole video, the artist is looking towards the sky. And this retraces the journey that Hiwa took that I mentioned in the beginning, of him leaving Kurdistan and walking to Europe. And in this video, he retraces those steps again, and makes this contraption that he balances on his forehead. So it's a kind of long pole with these motorcycle mirrors on it. And this is how he navigates, so he can see behind him and in front of him as he looks up. And this highlights the disorientating journey and what it's like to go from Kurdistan in this dangerous situation where they were getting on a boat. They didn't know whether this boat was going to take them to Italy, was the planned destination, or whether they would be found. They had, between himself and his friends, they had only a little bit of food, to the point that they ate all of that and they had to eat the paper that it was wrapped in. And then once they had arrived at the destination, it was not knowing exactly if they had arrived in the right place or if they would be found out and taken back to Kurdistan. So as he's retracing this entire journey, he's talking about his experiences and this very disorientating viewpoint that he would have felt during 2001 when he made that journey. So it's a really poignant piece and kind of highlights that he's talking about these really kind of strong experiences and themes, but in a way that we can understand, obviously from not going through it. But again, a really, really strong piece. And then the Bell Project, which is in our reception currently. And this is an amazing piece. And if we were in, you'd be able to get to hear it ring, because it actually is there to be rung. And this is a work that was created for the Venice Biennale in 2015. And for the spell to be made, the artist actually needed 300 kilograms of bronze, and it's an extremely heavy piece, as we came to find out when we were installing it. But it's absolutely stunning when you come into the reception. So on this work, if you're able to, have I got some closer images? No. On it, there's figures from of a lamassu, which is a winged bull. So it has the head of a man and the wings of an eagle, and then the body of a bull. And this would have been, these kind of figures would have been situated in kind of entrances to cities. Most notably would have been kind of the ancient city of Nineveh, which would be outside Mosul, which obviously no longer exist. But these figures would have been kept in museums, and there were lamassu sculptures in the Mosul Museum, but these were actually then, when ISIS were in power, they destroyed them. So absolutely horrific to have these kind of ancient relics. And there's only a few others located around the world. I think there's some sculptures still in the Louvre, but not a lot. So he didn't want to necessarily make a bell in the start because he thought it was quite an obvious symbol to create. But when he found out that, so during World War One, there's a lot of bells were, and World War Two, a lot of bells were taken and melted down for weaponry. So this was happening all over Europe, and thousands and thousands and thousands of bells were taken to be melted down. And so for this, he actually went to his friend Nazad. So Nazad is the person that we came across in the previous work, who has this knowledge of all the shrapnel and weapons that have been found all around Iraq, and he's collected them, and he knows the history of them, and all of these weapons would have come from Western countries. So what they did for this work is actually melt down the shrapnel, and then in Italy, one of the last few places that still has been making bells for generations, casted this bell from that. So it's a cycle of using them as weapons and then melting them down for this beautiful bell. So it's kind of all those bells that were originally destroyed, it's kind of bringing those back, and referencing that history as well. So throughout it, there's two videos on display. So you have a video in Iraq and a video in Italy, and Nazad is giving his expert opinion on the metals, and the owners and where they came from. And then in Italy, you see the casting of this bell. So it's an incredible, absolutely incredible piece. And also to have this kind of European connection to all the bells that was kind of taken for weapons, and it kind of ties it in nicely then with why it should be shown in Europe, and the importance of that as well. So, and there's some, Hiwa actually has a video. He did like an artist talk for the exhibition, and he has a wonderful background on this piece and all the other pieces as well. So it's great to get his kind of viewpoint and why he was making the works, and kind of all those personal experiences that go along with it as well. So that's it, kind of just in a nutshell anyway.